Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to have Brenda Pike share about BERDO, the updated regulations, energy reduction disclosure ordinance for Boston. And just so everyone knows, this is a joint meeting of the Energy Cohort and MACDC's Boston Committee. So I don't know if I'm going to pass it over to Catherine just to give a quick intro, and then we'll turn it over to Brenda to get started with the presentation.
Hello, everybody. For folks that don't know me, my name is Catherine Martinez. I am the Director of Economic Development at MACDC. I hope you guys can all hear me well. And to Emily's point, this is a combined meeting with our Boston Committee, which I help staff on the MACD side. So we have a couple of our members here who this particular topic is extremely relevant for. So we're looking for them to get the updates, particularly because these are one of the areas of focus for us in a letter that we are crafting to send over to Michelle Wu's transition team. So I apologize for any confusion if you guys got some cancellations of this meeting and then it wasn't canceled. Little technical difficulty there, but thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me a private chat. I'll be more than happy to help navigate that piece of it. And I don't know if Joe, if you want to say anything, or can go back to Emily.
Oh, good. Really glad we're doing this. This is big. This is a big deal.
Great.
Thanks
well,
for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think without further ado, we'll pass it over to Brenda Pike, who is the climate advisor for the city of Boston. And we're so excited. We're very we're really lucky to have Brenda join us. She has a wealth of knowledge on this and really has been a leader in this area. And really, especially to support affordable housing on this journey toward carbon emission free, carbon future, building an economy. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Brenda, and then we'll have about a 25 minute presentation, and then we'll reserve a good 15 minutes or 15 or 20 minutes for questions. And so please, if and as you have questions, we'll hold them till the end, but put them in the chat and we'll be sure to answer them when we get to the discussion section, and we'll have that facilitated with Lauren Bauman. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brenda.
Great, thank you, Emily. So I know many of you may have participated in a meeting that we held about BERDO and affordable housing more than a year ago now, actually. So there might be a little bit of repetition from that, but now that it's passed, we have the opportunity to really dig into some of these details, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. There we go. So yeah, so in October, Mayor Janey signed BERDO 2.0, as we're calling it, into law after unanimous support by the City Council and really overwhelming support from the community. And I don't think I need to talk to this group about the importance of climate action. So we recognize that our climate is changing and communities of color and other socially vulnerable populations are disproportionately impacted. And we are not reducing our emissions fast enough. So Boston has reduced our emissions about 20% since 2005, but we really need to accelerate that. And 70% of Boston's greenhouse gas emissions are from buildings, and 4% of those buildings make up the majority of those emissions. So which is why we're focusing on performance standard. And the real benefits of that is that it targets that largest source of emissions, it sets long planning horizons for building owners to comply, and it gives them flexibility in how they comply. And 7 jurisdictions now have passed similar laws. So BERDO 1.0 cover buildings 35,000. I think somebody might not be muted. Happy to answer questions in the middle, but if you want to save your questions until the end, I might be addressing some of them in the presentation. So yes, so BERDO 1.0 had covered buildings 35,000 square feet and up had annual reporting, and then also an energy action or a audit requirement every 5 years. And BERDO 2.0 keeps that annual reporting, but that energy action has changed to complying with performance standard targets. So the targets are set by building type, and however you look at it, whether it's by square footage or emissions, the largest building types in Boston are office, multifamily, education, and healthcare. And so that's what I'm highlighting here. These are the emissions targets for those building types, and the full chart with all of the different building types is available at boston.gov/BERDO. You can see here for multifamily in particular, 2025, those targets are 4.1 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square foot per year. And you can see that it's dropping every 5 years till it hits net zero by 2050. And if you have multiple building uses, then those can be blended together based on the square footage of those uses. And we've expanded the buildings that are covered by BERDO to anything above 20,000 square feet or 15 units to align with small project review for new construction. And for those new buildings coming on that are smaller and haven't had to report in the past, so their first year of reporting will be in 2022 for their 2021 data. And then they will be subject to those emissions targets starting in 2030 rather than 2025, like the other buildings who've been reporting in the past. So recognizing that every building is different, BERDO allows owners to choose how they comply. And here you can see the different options that are available to them. So we're factoring in the greening of the electricity grid according to Massachusetts plans. But building owners can also choose to do energy efficiency upgrades, which tend to be the most cost efficient options. They can do fuel switching to some sort of renewable heating or cooling, most likely electrification right now. They can procure renewable electricity either through on-site installations or off-site purchases, or they can pay an alternative compliance payment. And we'll dive into that in more detail a little bit later. And so for additional flexibility, owners who have more than one building can choose to comply as a portfolio. So that if they're, for instance, doing a lot of work on one building for one compliance cycle, but their capital plans don't touch other buildings until later on, that one building may get them below their target for the near term, and then vice versa for the work in the other buildings in the future. Owners can apply for an individual compliance schedule, which needs to be aligned with city goals for 2030 and 2050, or they can apply for hardship compliance plans. And so the intention of that is for buildings with unique characteristics or circumstances that present a hardship. And one of those that was explicitly mentioned in the ordinance as part of that is affordable housing refinancing timelines, for instance. Decisions about the things like individual compliance schedules and hardship compliance plans will be made by a review board. And as well as decisions about how to spend any funds that come in through the alternative compliance payment, and that alternative compliance payment fund, or equitable emissions investment fund as we're calling it, will prioritize emissions reduction projects that benefit environmental justice populations. So, and again, the ordinance specifically calls out affordable housing as one of those areas that could focus on. And 2/3 of the review board members will be nominated by community-based organizations. And the regulations will lay out that nomination process, as well as details about stipends for board members for whom participation is not part of their job. And I will talk about that regulations development process a little bit later. And here are the areas of expertise that will be looked for in those members. And I think this is something that folks here might be very interested in. I'm not sure exactly what that process will be yet, but that will be laid out as we go through the regulations development process. So I mentioned the alternative compliance payment. This is not a fine. I will talk about those later, but the alternative compliance payment is really intended as a compliance path for building owners who, for whatever reason, miss their target in a given year. And for that incremental amount that they are over, they can pay into a fund to help decarbonize other buildings. And that alternative compliance payment was set at the average amount that Synapse and the technical advisory group calculated was the average cost to decarbonize a building in Boston at $234 per ton of emissions reduced. And that amount will be reviewed on a regular basis and updated. But for 2025, this is what people can plan on. And there now will be third-party verification of the data that's reported, both in the first year that people report. So in 2022, everyone will have to do that. And then also any year where there's a change in the performance targets. So 2026 for the 2025 data, right? 2031 for the 2030 data, and so on. And then there are penalties for building owners who don't comply with the reporting or emissions targets. And the goal is that the alternative compliance payment should calculate out to be less than those fines for non-compliance. And to see how this might apply to actual buildings, Synapse looked at audits for a couple of multifamily buildings. For this particular one here with high emissions, it might make sense to choose an individual compliance path. This building, I believe this building had a existing emissions of 10 kilograms of CO2e per square foot, and the 2025 goal is 4.1, so you're significantly over. And then the major improvements that would get them, they might choose to get to their targets. So for 2025, there's a whole series of efficiency improvements that were identified in their audit, including insulation at the end of their roof life. For 2030, they might just purchase renewable energy credits for the amount that they're over their target because they don't have any plans to do any construction, any retrofits that year. By 2035, when their heating system reaches its end of life, switching that to a VRF system to electrify that. And then same thing when their water heating reaches its end of life. And then from there out, the building is electric and can ride the grid to net zero in 2050. And the incremental cost for this was estimated to be $89 per ton of emissions reduced. Or actually $22 per ton if you factor in the energy savings from the measures that were done, which is significantly less than that $234 per ton alternative compliance payment. And if you're interested in all of the details of this, they're included in the appendix for this, and you can dig into them when the slides are distributed after the meeting. So we also took a look at a low emissions multifamily building. This one, I believe, was 3.5 kilograms of CO2e per square foot. And for them, it just made sense to use the standard targets. And so in 2025, they're under already. For 2030, they could do some efficiency work and boiler electrification. 2035, electrifying their water heaters at the end of their life. And then planned grid improvement should get them to the 2050 targets after that. And then the incremental cost of this would actually be higher than for the high emissions building, because this building had already done quite a bit of work and had already plucked that low hanging fruit. So the work here would cost $188 per ton of emissions reduced, or $191 per ton if you're factoring in the additional cost of the electrification. But again, that's still lower than that alternative compliance payment. So it would probably make sense for the building owner to choose to make the improvements to their building. So we know that resources and support will be critical for building owners to be able to meet these targets. So we collected financial and technical resources online in a retrofits resource hub. You can see the address here. And it includes information about not just how to comply with the performance standard, but general information about how to decarbonize a building and funding options. There are particular sections there for multifamily building owners and affordable multifamily buildings in particular. And so I think that that will be very useful to people. And if you come across anything else that you think should be included on there, absolutely send it our way. We will be updating this on a regular basis. And as we're building this out over time, there will definitely be even more opportunities for one-on-one consultations than there are now. Although you can absolutely reach out anytime right now. But the Environment Department isn't intending to staff up to be able to offer much more assistance, like one-on-one support moving forward. And then also, I wanted to mention that we are in the middle of developing the regulations. And that process will be broken up into two different parts. So right now we are putting together the regulations for reporting requirements and data verification. And those should be available, a draft version should be available in the next couple of weeks. And a listening session is planned for January 7th. So we'll absolutely make sure that folks on here are included on any communications about that. And if you want to make sure that you are included in any communications about BERDO in the future, make sure to go to boston.gov/BERDO and sign up for the newsletter there. For 2022, buildings are required to, that are required to report will receive a notice in early January. And building owners can request a reporting extension until November, from May 15th to November 15th. So you can get a 6-month extension for this first year. And then the process for phase 2 of the regulations will start in the spring. And that will include much more interesting topics like the review board and various ways to comply with the targets. So a lot to come, and we are absolutely looking for your feedback, any questions, concerns that you have as part of this. There's a feedback form that folks are sending out to building owners through email newsletters, through webinars that are being held. So any concerns you have, you can send them in there, or you can reach out to myself or other folks in the environment department. We're definitely open to hearing from you. So that was a lot, but I'm sure you have more questions. I'm happy to answer any of them either now or in the future if anything comes up.
Thanks so much, Brenda. All right, so we'll move into the question and answers portion. There haven't been a ton of questions put into the chat yet, but there was one specifically around some of the cost metrics that you were providing. And namely, those were very much within the context of cost per metric ton of carbon or carbon dioxide equivalent. And so one of the questions that somebody posed was related to whether or not there's information related to the metrics around square footage and cost. Because I think the affordable housing community very much from a financial planning perspective thinks about cost impact related to per square foot with that sort of normalizing factor in place. So I think if there's any information related to those case studies that Synapse had done that translated that cost per metric ton into cost per square foot to give them a sense of that financial impact, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so for that first building, the high emissions one, which was a lower cost to comply, that was 10 cents per square foot per year with the energy savings factored into that. And for that low emissions building, the costs were 17 cents per square foot per year with that additional electricity usage factored into it.
That's great. Wow, you had the information right off the top there. That's awesome. Some questions from Gail about funds being available to affordable housing developers to implement the needed changes. So I think that gets into this alternative compliance fund and, you know, how much we think they'll be in there and when that will start to be available. I know you're probably still developing some of the details around that, but is there any more that you could share related to that?
The way that it's written into the ordinance right now, there would not be funding available until, you know, compliance starts in 2026. But we're definitely looking into not just ways to be able to pre-fund that, but also additional sources of funding for building owners that would not be necessarily that our own fund, but other funds that we can connect building owners with. One of the things that we are working on that is not a grant program per se, but it's a financing program, is where we are working with the Green Ribbon Commission and Mass CEC. They've hired a consultant to develop a business plan for a climate bank. And so the idea with that would be, you know, having sort of, you know, concessional rates for this type of work or other things, other ways that we could be helping building owners to do this work. I know that there is in the current version of the Build Back Better program or the Build Back Better funding, there is some funding in there for climate banks. And so that's one of the things that we are preparing for, but that's not the only thing that we are looking at right now.
Great. So I have some more specific questions about reporting. So I think these are coming from folks who maybe haven't had to do reporting under previous versions of BERDO, and maybe now these new thresholds are triggering reporting in their buildings. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you navigate issues related to utilities paid by tenants versus the owner of the building?
Muted. So there is currently guidance on boston.edu, boston.gov/BERDO about the process for reporting through Portfolio Manager. And it's kind of a step-by-step process there. We're going to be updating it because there will be additional information that will be required. and those guidance documents will be coming out very soon. In terms of the utility data for tenants, there is a system set up right now. I know Eversource has a utility data portal where building owners can get the aggregated data of all the tenants of their building. And I know National Grid has a process set up for that as well, and that's outlined in the guidance documents as well. I know there have been some issues getting utility data in the past, but there's definitely plans to work with the utilities, pulling together a utility working group to identify where those issues are and try to work on them moving forward.
Great. Another quick question about RECs and what sort of RECs will qualify. So is it only Class 1 Massachusetts RECs that you're considering?
Yes. Yep. We heard a lot of community feedback about the desire to have any sort of RECs to be very local, just because looking for benefits, especially in terms of air quality and things like that, wanting to see those benefits locally.
All right, some questions about how this relates to what the city is doing on the new construction side of things. So obviously there's a lot of existing buildings that need to be retrofit to solve these climate issues, but then new construction buildings are also an interesting opportunity to be able to do the same. So can you talk a little bit about how the city is thinking about how these programs complement each other, or how a new construction program would transition into a BERDO compliance process?
Yeah, so any building, any new construction buildings, the moment that they're constructed, they are subject to BERDO. So it would definitely benefit any developer who's looking to build a building to make sure that they're thinking, decades out in order to not have to immediately turn around and retrofit that building to meet these targets.
Great. I think I'm mostly seeing that as the end of the questions that folks have posted, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to. Sure.
Can I just follow up on that one? And I know, Brenda, you're not in the affordable housing business specifically, but when we put new affordable housing deals together, obviously we're trying to keep the costs low because the city and the state want us to keep the costs low, and we all want to keep the costs low so we can build as many buildings as possible. And so the big question, it seems the obvious question that's sort of staring us in the face is, should we put natural gas heating systems into new buildings, knowing that taxpayers are going to have to replace those systems in the next 29 years, or 27 years, or 26 years, by the time the building actually comes online, if it's being permitted today. And, what do you think about that? Is the city thinking about that? And it seems, as affordable housing developers relying on public subsidy, both state, federal, and local, it's a big question we have to ask ourselves, or maybe we'll just be told what to do. But any thoughts? And this is really a question for the whole group too, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would make sense right now to be building buildings to as high a standard as we can, energy-wise, so that it doesn't cost more down the road to go back in and retrofit them. And there's some great buildings that have been built in the last couple of years. I'm thinking Finch Cambridge is one great example that was built to a passive house standard. And so it's possible. I think I was talking with Bev Craig from Mass CEC just yesterday, and she was saying that it was just a 1.4% premium to do that passive house level. And that's within the sort of the noise on new construction.
So I'll just add a little more since I happen to be on the call. Brenda doesn't mind. So we have been funding 8 affordable housing passive house projects, and on average, it's been about 2.4% incremental cost. And the number one cost in that incremental cost has been around much better ventilation. The passive house standard requires much better ventilation. And honestly, after COVID, I don't think many of us think that's a bad idea. It's probably a very good idea. We should be doing it all the time anyway. That's not to say there isn't some additional costs. There definitely are. And, but I will say this issue of gas for initial heating, if you're building a Boston building, heating and cooling, I think I would recommend highly against going with gas. You're gonna, it's very doable. If you're gonna have cooling at all in your systems, it's probably cheaper up front anyway, than except for like combis. So I don't, you know, there is an operating issue, but I would say like go as low as you can, be as efficient as you can with that new construction envelope, and then put in heat pumps for heating and cooling. Central hot water, I don't know. Like right now, I don't know what I would do if I was making that choice, but I think Boston pretty strongly encourages you in the permitting process to try and go as all electric anyway. So maybe it's not an issue, Dawn. I don't know in Boston if you have much choice. So
I think that aligns with our experience with projects that we've worked in Boston that are going through the Article 80, Article 37 process. That's all going to be updated soon as well. And there's some draft reports on the city's website related to recommendations from each of the technical advisory groups related to things like what the carbon intensity targets should be, what the EUI targets should be. But from a practical perspective, you know, when projects are going through the permitting process, the city is really pushing them towards hitting this 1.6 threshold for carbon intensity. And so that's much more aggressive than, you know, some of the early thresholds we're talking about now. It's really more like that 2035 to 2040 threshold in the BERDO program. So the city's setting up a runway for existing buildings to get there, but expecting new construction buildings to really be planning for that sort of 2035 carbon emissions target. So there are a couple, sorry, go ahead.
Lauren, were you going to share Caitlin's comment?
Yeah, let's see. So I think there've been some questions about, you know, buildings that might not trigger the 20,000 square foot or 15 plus unit threshold. And one of the questions is, do you foresee a sort of future development of the BERDO regulation requiring smaller buildings to comply? Like, do we feel like this will be kind of a stage thing where this threshold will continue to go down over time? And is there any thought around that? And then I think, you know, just a sentiment from Caitlin around really making sure that owners are thinking strategically about their buildings before rehab or retrofit, and really evaluating what their carbon intensity is at that point, and then recording improvements that they're doing. So this way they can potentially take advantage of them if they need to comply further down the road.
So there are no plans right now to drop that size threshold anymore. I know I've seen other cities do different types of policies for smaller buildings, like rental efficiency standards and things like that, which are slightly different and are maybe more streamlined for some of these smaller building owners.
All right, any other questions we haven't gotten to, or that folks want to jump in and just ask directly? I had a question just that I had thought about that might be useful for folks. So you had talked about the different compliance pathways, that there's the individual compliance pathway, which would be building by building, but then there's also this opportunity to evaluate your portfolio within the city limits compliance and trying to get there with that approach. How does that work over time? Can you choose individual compliance now and then shift into a portfolio level compliance in a future, you know, review process, or are you really committing up front to reviewing your buildings at either the individual or the portfolio level from the start?
That is a really good question, actually, and that's something that's going to be addressed in the second phase of the regulations. Once we have a review board that is set up, and we'll be really digging into this. So it's not just the environment department doing it with feedback from community members. I mean, I think that's not necessarily something that building owners need to be considering this year, because when you're reporting, you're still going to be reporting on an individual building level. It's just when you are complying with those targets, you will be choosing to do that at a portfolio level or not. And I know that construction takes time, and so the farther out you can be planning, the better. But yeah, we'll definitely be digging into those details more next year.
In terms of nominations for that review board, can you talk a little bit about what might take somebody out of the running in terms of conflict of interest? Like, I could see that there might be a lot of organizations who are interested in being part of that conversation, but may also have buildings that are under review. And is there any thought about, how nomination should accommodate for that, or would there be opportunities for people to just recuse themselves if the review board was essentially ruling on something related to a project that they were affiliated with?
Yeah, there haven't been any decisions made about that. Again, that's going to be addressed in that second phase of regulations. Yeah.
So we have a question here about portfolio manager and whether that's the only way to report, or is it okay to use WegoWise? So a portfolio manager is definitely the main way to report. We will have a supplemental form for some of that additional information that's outside of portfolio manager. But if you're using other software like WegoWise, I think it's relatively simple to import that data into portfolio manager in order to report.
Yeah, I'll say as someone who did it, it's one button and it automatically reports every time you get a bill. So easy. And same with Bright Power, their product. I'm trying to remember what that was.
Energy scorecards.
Energy scorecards.
Brenda, I had a question. I know that you mentioned you were staffing up at the environment department to maybe provide additional resources. If there are owners that want to come to you, and I'm looking at the retrofit resource hub, it looks excellent. But if someone wants to go to your team and kind of have a one-on-one meeting to review their portfolio, is that something that you offer? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. And we've already had some initial conversations with building owners who've reached out to us and looked at their buildings, individually and then together as a portfolio to see where they stand compared to these targets, and to talk through some of the options that they might have.
And I would also just put a plug in for the program that LISC supports, where they help fund evaluation of energy conservation measures for rehab projects. So I'd say, if you've got a rehab project coming down the pipeline for a building that either currently does or needs to report, it's a fantastic opportunity to really dive into this issue and start to evaluate your current carbon emissions, your energy efficiency and water efficiency opportunities, and then really come up with a plan that includes the pending rehab and leveraging that as much as possible, but also looks to some of these other future investments that you're going to be making in terms of end of useful life to try and develop a strategy for your building. So if you need support in that, LISC has great opportunities for that.
Yes, everybody. I think everybody should be thinking in terms of zero overtime plans. Absolutely, factoring in different points of equipment lifespan and refinancing and things like that to factor in these retrofits. I would also plug Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. They're doing a program that they're calling Realize Mass, and they're looking to do deep energy retrofits of 1,000 units by the end of 2023. And so they're looking to partner with multifamily affordable building owners in particular to do these deep energy retrofits. And I think they have some funding for feasibility studies.
An administrative question just came in terms of where the notices related to BERDO go. So do they go to the physical address or parcel of the building, or do they get sent to the parent organization? A question from somebody who recently had their offices move and is concerned about just making sure they get those notices.
That's a good question. So we, especially for those new buildings, the 20,000 to 35,000 square feet, we are relying on tax assessment data. And so if your data is not correct with the city's tax assessor, then you might not be receiving that to the correct address. So definitely reach out to us and let us know who the contact is for your building.
All right, I think that's everything I'm seeing. Any other questions? Emily, do you want to transition to other announcements?
Sure.
Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. That was terrific, and we'll share your presentation afterwards and contact information if anyone has questions to follow up. So we really appreciate it. So yeah, we're gonna head over to announcements. We have a few announcements, and I think Bev will have you kick us off with talking about the workforce training fund that's available.
Yeah, so I just want to make everyone in the energy cohort or in MACDC's world aware of some great continuing education free resources that are available now. So Built Environment Plus, which is a nonprofit, you might think of them more, they used to be USGBC Massachusetts, and now they sort of do broader kind of work. They have figured out how to use state workforce funds to provide continuing education for Massachusetts companies. So that does include nonprofits. Anybody under 100 employees that's in Massachusetts can apply through Built Environment Plus for free continuing education training. And that does include the LEED Green Associate, which I know LISC has in the past sometimes sponsored that for free for CDC members, MACDC members. It also includes WELL, which is one of those paths that MHP and Mass Housing sometimes like to see in their refinancing projects. It also includes certified passive house consultant. And so anyone, and actually there's a lot of other really cool classes as well. We will send the list of classes that are available. Some have to do with rehabilitation as well, which might be a good fit for anyone who's on this call, because you're trying to figure out how we're going to rehab this, your building to comply with BERDO. What I would say is it's a fairly easy process. We have heard, we want to hear if that is not true, and there will be an email that goes out with Emily's summary and where the links are and stuff that it will show you the list of classes. Basically, they can spend up to $30,000 a year for any company under 100 employees on this continuing education work. So take advantage of it. Please let teams that you work with that are doing rehab projects or new constructions know about it. You want your architect to get certified passive house consultant. You want your architect to have WELL certifications. Same thing with your builders. The passive house builder course and tradesperson course is going to be added. And if you're interested in embodied carbon, Tally, which is one of the ways that architects can take their architectural drawings and give you an estimate of what's high and low in embodied carbon for different choices you have. So I just encourage you, it's free stuff. It's a great way. I know when I worked for homeowners rehab, they never had money for continuing education. So this is free, use it. It's great for project managers to have this kind of stuff, and it's great for your career as well.
Thank you, Bev. That's great. And yeah, we'll send out details about this after so folks can take advantage of it. There's a few criteria that your organization has to fall into, but it should, I think most CDCs should be applicable, and some maybe smaller or of the larger affordable housing providers. So, so really appreciate that. So we just had a quick announcement on the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan. The draft of the plan, which governs the low-income housing tax credit program, as many of you know, just came out. they really updated a lot of the what was called like the sustainable, green, and climate ready design section for the green building design. We're very excited about it. We will have some talking points and some a written template if folks are interested in and want to share comments. The public session is on next week on the 22nd, conveniently timed. It is a virtual session at 10:30, and we highly encourage all of our affordable housing partners and the affordable housing community to really speak up in commendation of these updates. And there's a few edits that we'll recommend just to make it even better. So we'll share around by early next week. We'll share those comments. But if folks are going to be giving public comment on Wednesday morning, then please email Bertha Boren at mass.gov. We'll send out the email and information about that. And then written comments can be taken in until, I believe, January 10th. So we really want to have as many stakeholders really provide comment as we can. And so happy to answer any questions on that.
Just add one
Yep.
thing, Emily. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I just put the link in the chat to the draft QAP for folks if they want to take a look at it. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Don. And then just one more plug, and then I'm going to turn it over to Neha to share a little more about our Slack channel. But we are going to be looking for topics for the energy cohort for 2022. We've really gone through the breadth of what really a fair amount of what our energy cohort members have been interested in over the last year. And so we're looking to you to what do you want to learn next? What do you want to talk about? What's the highest priority for you as it relates to green, sustainable, climate ready design, new construction, rehabs, healthy housing for your properties, for your community. So we want to hear it, and we're going to be sending out a Google survey just to capture some of those ideas. But please reach out if you have any thoughts. If you want to share something you're working on, learning about, have had challenges or success with, we want to hear that as well. And we'd love to provide this platform so you can share with others. And so I'm going to turn it over to Neha now to talk a little more about our Slack channel, which is really another way that we're trying to increase participation and a more democratic energy cohort. So it's not just us telling you what to do, but you can hear it from each other and share things that you're learning and seeing with the whole group. So Neha, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. For those of you I don't know, hi, I'm Neha. I'm the climate policy intern at MACDC. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly so I can show you the Slack if you're not in it or if you are and are not sure how to use it. So I'm going to send the link right after here to be a part of the group, but basically we have all these different channels for different purposes, and we hope that you'll use it as an opportunity to engage with each other and ask questions, post events and things like that. And then if you want to get email notifications for messages, or if it's an announcement that you want everyone to see, you should tag it with @channel, and then it'll notify everyone in the channel via email. But otherwise, if you want, you can also direct message people or just post in it and then check it periodically to see what's going on in there. So that's about it. If you have specific questions about the Slack, I'll put my email in the chat as well, and you can reach out to me and ask those and I can help you out. But that's all from me.
Thank you, Neha. Is there any other announcements or comments that folks want to make? Feel free to unmute and share if you have it.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. I was looking at sort of the reporting ordinance for 2022 and I guess beyond, and the table I'm looking at gives the targets for 2025 to 2029, I think is the first phase. What are the expectations from now until 2025? It looks like, our greenhouse gas emissions are in a good place related to that table. So I don't know if I missed that or if it's captured in the slides, but just curious about that period in the in between. Are we're good, if we're meeting the initial threshold for 2025 to 2029?
Yeah. So between now and 2025, it's just the annual reporting and the making plans for future work to to comply with future targets.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks, Brenda.
Great. Thank you, Nate. Any other questions or comments?
Brenda, I forgot to ask one quick thing, was just related to the reporting versus the third-party verification. Can you just talk a little bit about the difference between those things and, who does that third-party verification? Is that something owners need to contract somebody to do for them, or is that something the city provides?
Yes, so that would definitely be something that owners would need to contract to do. That will be laid out in the phase 1 regulations, and like I said, you should be seeing a draft of those very, very soon, in probably in the next week or so. But the idea behind them is that it's not a staff member of the building owner. It's the actual third party that they're contracting to.
Great. Well, thank you again, Brenda. This has been really informative, and I think we're excited to see this go into practice and see maybe some funding available to the affordable housing community to be able to really implement these decarbonization upgrades. So we really appreciate your time, and thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate your input, your feedback, comments, and please feel free to sign up on the Slack if you haven't already. And we'll be in touch with the slides, the recording from this, and then that survey to think about our topics for 2022. So thank you in advance for sharing your input on that. And we hope everyone has a lovely holiday season and enjoys the weather, and happy almost New Year to everyone. So with that, we'll see you all in 2022.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.